My name is Hannah Mitchell, and the night I turned 30 was supposed to be the night my family finally saw me. Instead, it was the night I learned they never had and never would. I booked the rooftop room at Albright's, this old steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan, with brass railings and a view of the East River that made everyone who saw it suck in a little breath. It cost me almost $3,000 just for the room rental, before food, before wine, before tips. I didn't blink at it. I'd just been promoted to director of litigation at one of the most respected firms in New York. 6 years of 80-hour weeks, of skipping holidays, of taking the cases nobody else wanted, and I'd done it. I was the youngest woman ever to hold that title at the firm. So yes, I wanted a celebration. One night, after 30 years of being the wallpaper in my own family, I wanted to stand at the front of a room and let people raise a glass for me. Have you ever wanted something so badly that wanting it felt like an embarrassment? Like even craving recognition was proof you didn't deserve it? If you have, then maybe you'll understand why this story still wakes me up sometimes at 3 in the morning, even now, 2 years later. And maybe, if it sounds familiar, telling it might give you the same thing, telling it gave me permission. Permission to stop earning love that was never on offer to begin with. Let me back up. I grew up in a town called West Haven, about an hour outside Boston. 2-story colonial, a maple tree my dad never trimmed, a dog named Biscuit who lived to be 17 and was the only creature in that house who ever ran to greet me when I came home. My younger brother Caleb is 3 years younger than me. He plays the cello, has since he was 6. He went to Juilliard on partial scholarship, then dropped out his junior year because, in my mother's words, the institution wasn't ready for his level of vision. He's 31 now and still living in a converted loft in Brooklyn that I pay the rent on. Or did. Until that night. My parents, my mother Eleanor, my father Douglas, built their entire identity around being the parents of a genius. I don't say that lightly. My mother had a section of the kitchen wall near the breakfast nook that was a literal shrine to Caleb. Newspaper clippings from when he was 12 and played at Tanglewood. A framed program from a recital at the Met. A photograph of him at 16 meeting Yo-Yo Ma backstage in Chicago. There were no pictures of me on that wall. There were no pictures of me on any wall. When relatives visited and asked, my mother would wave a hand and say, "Hannah doesn't really photograph well. She's more of a behind-the-scenes type." I was 11 the first time I heard her say it. I remember standing at the top of the stairs holding a stuffed rabbit I'd had since I was 4, listening to her say it to my Aunt Rosalind, and feeling something crack open in me that I spent the next 2 decades trying to glue shut with achievement. I made straight A's. I made valedictorian. I got into Columbia for undergrad, full ride. I went to Yale Law on a Coca-Cola Scholars Award. Every milestone, every graduation, every Dean's List letter, my mother would read it, smile politely and say, "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Did I tell you Caleb is being considered for a residency in Vienna? Caleb was never being considered for a residency in Vienna. He once was invited to audition for one. The story grew with each retelling until, in my mother's mouth, he had been personally requested by the orchestra director. None of it was true. But the truth wasn't the point. The point was that he was the sun, and I was something the sun cast a shadow over. I learned to live in that shadow the way some people learn to live with a bad knee. You compensate. You find ways. I poured myself into work. By the time I was 28, I was billing more hours than partners twice my age. I was the one the senior litigators called when a deposition fell apart. I was the one who took over the firm's biggest pharmaceutical case after the lead attorney had a heart attack and won it. And every 2 weeks, like clockwork, I sent money home. The mortgage on my parents' colonial. They refinanced when I was in law school and somehow could no longer afford the payments, even though my father is a tenured professor of economics, which is the kind of irony you can't make up. Caleb's rent in Brooklyn, his health insurance, his studio time at a recording space in Bushwick where he'd been working on the same album for 4 years. His grocery delivery because, my mother explained, an artist of his caliber shouldn't have to navigate something as mundane as a Whole Foods. I paid for it. All of it. From the day I got my first paycheck at 25, I had 3 automatic transfers going out of my account on the 1st of every month. By the year I turned 30, I'd given my family just over $400,000. Nobody ever thanked me. Not once. Not a card. Not a phone call. Caleb sent me a text once that said, "Appreciate you, sis." And that was the closest thing to gratitude I ever received from any of them. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself family was family, that this was love, this was what you did, that one day they'd see me, really see me, and it would all be worth it. I want you to know that. I want you to know I believed it, right up until I didn't. Which brings us back to the rooftop at Albright's. I'd invited about 30 people, colleagues. 2 of my law school friends, my mentor, Judge Patricia Whitlock, who'd been my first clerkship supervisor and the closest thing I'd ever had to a mother figure, the senior partner of my firm, Mr. Avery, and, of course, my parents. Caleb, I'd been told, couldn't make it because he had a creative breakthrough in progress and didn't want to interrupt his flow. I told myself I was relieved. I'd asked my parents 3 times if they were sure they were coming, and 3 times my mother had assured me, in that brisk, slightly impatient tone she used when I asked questions she found tedious, that of course they would be there. The night of, I wore a navy silk dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I'd had my hair done. I looked, for once in my life, like someone who deserved to be photographed. I stood at the door of the rooftop room and greeted each guest by name. Judge Whitlock hugged me and said, "Hannah, I am so proud of you, you have no idea." I almost cried right there. I held it together. My parents arrived 20 minutes late. They walked in like they were attending someone else's gallery opening. My mother in cream cashmere and pearls, my father in his usual rumpled blazer. Neither of them brought anything. No flowers, no gift, not even a card. My mother kissed the air beside my cheek and said, "This place is rather flashy, isn't it?" My father grunted something I couldn't make out and went straight for the bar. I tried not to let it land. I've been trying not to let things land my whole life. Dinner began. The wine flowed. Judge Whitlock stood up first to give a toast, and what she said about me, about my work ethic, my integrity, the way I'd handled the pharmaceutical trial, I will hold those words inside me until the day I die. People applauded. People raised their glasses. My mother sipped her wine and looked at her phone. Then Mr. Avery rose. He was in his late 60s, a man of few words, the kind of senior partner you do not, under any circumstances, interrupt. He spoke for about 3 minutes. He said I was the most strategically brilliant young litigator he had encountered in 40 years of practice. He said I was a credit to the firm and to the profession. He said the partnership track had been adjusted to expedite my consideration. The room fell into the kind of silence that only happens when something extraordinary has just been said. People turned to look at me. I felt my face flush. I looked at my parents. My father was scrolling through his phone. My mother was sitting up straighter, finally engaged but not looking at me. She was looking at the room. And then she did something I will never forget. She raised her own glass, smiled around the table, and in the warm, performative voice she reserved for people she wanted to impress, she said, "Well, isn't that lovely? Of course, we've always been so blessed with our children. Caleb, our youngest, is finishing the album of his career. Yo-Yo Ma himself has expressed interest. That's the kind of legacy that matters, isn't it? Money is one thing, but art is forever." I want to describe the silence that followed, but I'm not sure I have the words. It was the silence of 30 professionals, several of them litigators trained to read a room, all simultaneously realizing that a mother had just stepped on her daughter's defining career moment to brag about a son who wasn't even there. I saw Judge Whitlock's mouth fall open. I saw Mr. Avery set his glass down very, very slowly, and I saw, finally, all the way through, what these people were, what they had always been, what no amount of money or achievement was ever going to change. My father looked up from his phone, sensed the temperature in the room, and decided to help. He cleared his throat. He said, in that slow professorial voice he used for undergraduates he found beneath him, "Hannah's a good worker. She's always been our reliable one. But let's be honest. Pushing paper for corporations isn't exactly the same as creating something meaningful, is it? We've always told her, your sister Hannah works hard, but Caleb, well, Caleb is the one who matters. I want you to understand. He didn't whisper this. He said it at full volume to a room of my colleagues on the night of my promotion. After Mr. Now, Avery had just announced I was being fast-tracked to partner. I don't know how long the silence lasted after that. It could have been a second. It could have been a minute. But I remember standing up. I remember the sound of my chair scraping back. I remember the way the room held its breath. I remember saying very calmly, "Do you know how much money I have given this family in the last 5 years?" My mother's face went tight. "Hannah, this is not the $412,000. I said the number into the silence, and I watched it land like a stone in a pond. "That is your mortgage. That is my brother's rent. That is his health insurance. That is his studio time. That is his groceries, Mom. I have been paying for his groceries for 4 years. While I worked 80-hour weeks, while I never went on a vacation, while I sat in my apartment alone on Christmas because nobody invited me home." My mother started to speak. I didn't let her. "Do you know what Caleb has produced in those 4 years? Nothing. Not one finished song. Not one performance. Not one paid gig. He is 31 years old, and he is living in a loft I pay for, eating food I pay for, while you tell strangers he is the next Yo-Yo Ma." My father stood up. His face was the color of a brick. "You are out of line, young lady." "No, Dad," I said. "I am 30 years old. I am the youngest director of litigation in my firm's history. I am not a young lady. I am the woman who has kept your house from going into foreclosure for half a decade, and you are telling a room full of my professional peers that what I do doesn't matter." My mother stood up then, too, and what came out of her mouth next is the sentence I will carry to my grave. She looked at me, with that practiced smile still half frozen on her face, and she said, "Honestly, Hannah, sometimes I think your father and I would have been happier if we'd stopped after 1 child. Things were so much more peaceful before you came along." I heard someone gasp. I think it was Judge Whitlock. I'm not sure. I looked at my mother, at the woman who had carried me for 9 months and had, apparently, been quietly resenting it ever since. I looked at my father, who was standing beside her, nodding. Actually, nodding, as though she had said something reasonable, and something inside me, something that had been holding on for 30 years, finally let go. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I picked up my wine glass. I took one slow sip. I set it back down, and I said in a voice so calm it surprised even me, "You know what, Mom? Wish granted. From this moment forward, you have 1 child. I am no longer your daughter. Live the rest of your lives as though I was never born. I will return the favor." I picked up my purse. I walked the length of that long table, past every shocked face, past Judge Whitlock, who reached out and squeezed my hand as I passed. I didn't look back at my parents. I didn't need to. I walked down 4 flights of stairs because I couldn't bear to stand still in an elevator. I stepped out onto Lexington Avenue. It had started to rain, that thin, cold, late October New York rain that gets into your collar. I walked 12 blocks to my apartment without an umbrella. I didn't shed a single tear. I got home. I took off the navy dress. I put on sweatpants. I sat on my couch in the dark, and then I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was log into my bank. I had 3 recurring transfers set up, all on autopay, all going out on the 1st of every month. The mortgage, the rent, the health insurance. I canceled them all. Just like that. 3 clicks. The screen asked me, "Are you sure?" I clicked yes. Then I logged into Caleb's health insurance portal. I was the policyholder since I'd been paying for it, and I removed him. I logged into the property management company that handled his loft, and I sent a brief formal email stating I was terminating my role as guarantor effective immediately and requesting confirmation. I logged into the recording studio in Bushwick and canceled the standing monthly booking I'd been paying for, also in my name. It took me about 45 minutes. By the end, I had unwound $400,000 worth of obligations to my family in less than an hour. There was no rush of anger. There was no surge of triumph. There was only a strange, clean, almost surgical quiet. I went to bed. I slept 12 hours. When I woke up the next morning, I had 47 missed calls and 112 text messages. I read none of them. I made coffee. I sat by my window and watched the city wake up. I thought about my dog Biscuit, who had died when I was 16, and how he was the only one in that house who had ever loved me without conditions, and how it had taken me 14 years to understand that what I'd been calling love from my parents was actually a kind of bookkeeping. They gave when it served them. They withheld when it didn't. They'd have stopped after one child if they could have. So I gave them what they wanted. The next 2 weeks were quiet. At work, Mr. Avery didn't say a word to me about the dinner. He didn't have to. He just walked into my office on the Monday and slid a folder across my desk. "The Henderson case," he said. "It's yours, lead chair." It was the biggest case the firm had taken on that year. $200 million exposure. He left without elaborating. I understood. He'd seen what he'd seen, and this was his way of saying, "You are who I thought you were, and that woman is not." Judge Whitlock called me on the Wednesday. She didn't ask if I was okay. She knew me better than that. She said, "Hannah, my husband and I would like you to come for Thanksgiving. We're having my niece and her family. There will be a lot of people. There will be a lot of food. You will not be the youngest one there. You will not be required to be brilliant. You will be required to bring a pie. Are we clear?" I started crying for the first time since the dinner. I said, "Yes, ma'am. Apple or pumpkin?" She said both, obviously. About 6 weeks after the dinner, my parents found me. I'm not sure how exactly. I suspect Caleb gave them my apartment address when they pressured him hard enough. He'd never been good at pressure. They showed up on a Saturday afternoon. I was in leggings. I'd just come back from a run. The doorman called up and said there was a couple downstairs who claimed to be my parents and who were quite insistent. I almost said no. I almost just said no. Send them away. But something in me wanted to see it through. I wanted to look them in the face one more time on my territory and know, really know, that I had made the right choice. I told the doorman to send them up. When they walked into my apartment, they looked smaller than I remembered. My mother had on the same cream cashmere. My father had not shaved. They didn't apologize. They didn't ask if they could sit. They just stood in my living room, and my mother said, "Hannah, this has gone on long enough. We need to talk about Caleb." I didn't say anything. "He's been evicted," my father said. "The property management company says you withdrew as guarantor. He has nowhere to go." "He could go to your house," I said. "That's not, Hannah, you know that's not appropriate. He needs to be in the city for his work." "His work," I said. "And his health insurance," my mother said. "He's been having some panic attacks. He needs to see his therapist. The new insurance estimate is unreasonable." "He's 31, I said. "Hannah, please." My mother actually took a step toward me. "We are family. Family helps each other." I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, but it wasn't anger. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was a kind of bone-deep, quiet, almost peaceful clarity, like standing on a beach after a long storm and realizing the wind has finally died. I said, "Mom, Dad, I want you to listen to me very carefully because I am only going to say this once. You told me, in a room full of my professional colleagues, that you wished you had stopped having children after my brother. You told me my work doesn't matter. You told me, in front of the woman who is my professional mentor, that I am less than my unemployed brother who has produced nothing in 4 years. Then you came here, 6 weeks later with no apology, to ask me to keep paying his rent. You are not bad people in some dramatic, cinematic way. You are something worse. You are people who have looked at your daughter for 30 years and seen a checking account with a face. And the only reason you're here in my apartment right now is that the checking account closed." My father started to interrupt. I held up my hand. He stopped. "I want you to leave," I said. "I want you to leave my apartment, and I want you to leave my life. If Caleb cannot afford his rent, he can move home. If he cannot afford his therapist, he can find a new one on a sliding scale, the way most adults do. If you cannot afford your mortgage, you can sell the house. You have equity. You have options. You are not victims of anything except the choice you made repeatedly to treat your daughter like a means to an end. You wished I had never been born. I am giving you exactly what you wished for. I am no longer your daughter. Please leave. My mother started to cry. I think it was a real cry, actually. I think for the first time in my entire life, I had said something to her that she could not deflect, could not minimize, could not turn into a quote about Caleb's genius. I think for 1 second she understood what she had done, and I want to tell you that I felt sorry for her. I want to tell you that some part of me wanted to soften and pull her into a hug, but I didn't, because feeling sorry for her was the trap I had been in for 30 years. Pity had been their leash on me, and I had finally chewed through it. I walked to the door. I opened it. I stood beside it. They left. My father said, on the way out, "You will regret this." I said, "Maybe, but it'll be my regret, not yours." The door closed behind them, and I stood there for a long time in the quiet of my own apartment, in the late afternoon light, and I felt, for the first time in my entire life, like the room I was standing in actually belonged to me. The Henderson case took me 8 months. We won it. The settlement made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I made partner 3 months after that, the youngest in the firm's history. A reporter from a women's professional magazine asked to interview me about my path. I almost said no. I'd never wanted to be visible. But I thought about all the women out there who'd been told their work didn't matter, that their sacrifices were invisible, that they were the wallpaper in their own families. And I said yes. I told the truth, not all of it. I didn't name my parents. I didn't name Caleb. But I told the truth of what it had cost me. I talked about being the scapegoat in a high-achieving family. I talked about the financial parentification of adult children. I talked about how the people who demand the most from you are sometimes the people who value you the least, and how breaking free isn't about hating them. It's about finally, after a lifetime, deciding that you are worth your own loyalty. The piece went viral, not in a big, flashy way. In a slow, steady way, the way real things go. Women wrote to me, hundreds of them, thousands eventually. They told me they had cried at their kitchen tables reading it. They told me they had called their therapists. They told me they had finally canceled the recurring transfer to their narcissistic mother. One woman, a 48-year-old nurse from Phoenix, wrote me a letter that I still have framed on my office wall. It said, "Hannah, I am old enough to be your mother. I read your story and I finally went no contact with mine. Thank you for showing me it was allowed." I think about that letter sometimes when I'm tired, when the work is hard, when I lie awake and wonder if I should have done it differently, if I should have given them one more chance. I never give them one more chance. I learned, finally, that there is no such thing as one more chance with people like that. There is only the chance you keep giving away year after year until there is nothing left of you to give. I don't know what happened to the Colonial in West Haven. I don't know if they sold it or if they're still scraping by. I don't know what happened to Caleb. Last I heard, through a cousin who reached out about a year ago, he had moved back home and gotten a job at a music store in Boston. I hope in some quiet corner of my heart that he is okay. I hope he is finally being asked to stand on his own feet. I hope, eventually, he comes to understand that being the favorite of bad parents is its own kind of curse. But I don't reach out. I don't check on him. I don't read the messages they still send sometimes, 3 or 4 times a year, on holidays, on my birthday, the same recycled guilt wrapped up in different paper. I built a life, a real one. I'm dating a man named Theo who is kind in the small daily ways that matter, who asks me how my day was and listens to the answer, who has met Judge Whitlock and her husband and survived being thoroughly evaluated by them. I have a small dog now, a rescue mutt I named Biscuit, after the only family member from my childhood who ever ran to greet me at the door. I have learned, finally, that family is not the people who share your blood. Family is the people who, when you walk into a room, are glad you came. Family is the people who raise their glass when you're being celebrated and don't try to redirect the toast. Family is the people who let you matter without making you earn it. I have one of those now. I built her myself. And if you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in any of it, the invisible daughter, the human ATM, the one whose accomplishments somehow always become a footnote to someone else's story, I want you to hear this from me. The way I needed someone to say it to me at 30. You do not owe your suffering to people who have used you as a wallet. You do not owe forgiveness to people who have not asked for it. You do not owe your presence to people who have spent your whole life telling you they wish you weren't there. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to keep your money. You are allowed to build a smaller, quieter, truer family out of the people who actually see you. And the day you do, I promise you, the silence on the other side of that door isn't loneliness. It's freedom. It just takes a little while to learn the difference. I think about that night at Albright's more than I'd like to admit. Not because I regret what I did. I don't, not for a single second, but because I've come to understand something about how I got there in the first place. For 30 years, I gave my mother and father everything I had, and the more I gave, the less they saw me. That wasn't an accident. That was a pattern, and I was the one feeding it. Every time I sent another transfer, every time I swallowed another comparison to Caleb, every time I told myself, next year they'll notice, I was teaching them, very patiently, that I would always show up no matter how badly they treated me. They learned the lesson I taught them. I cannot blame them for being good students of my silence. That's the part nobody tells you about cause and effect in a family like mine. The cruelty wasn't just falling on me. I was, in some quiet way, holding the umbrella over it. The night I canceled those transfers, I wasn't just punishing them. I was finally telling the truth about what I valued. And when you tell the truth about what you value, the world reorganizes itself around it. Mr. Avery handed me the Henderson case. Judge Whitlock invited me to Thanksgiving. Thea walked into my life. None of those things would have been possible while I was still spending 45 hours a week being a daughter to people who didn't want one. If I could sit down with the woman I was at 25, the one setting up those auto-pay transfers with such hopeful, stupid pride, I would tell her 3 things. I would tell her that being a good person does not require you to be a useful one. That goodness without limits isn't goodness. It's a slow form of self-erasure, dressed up as virtue. I would tell her that intelligence isn't only what you do at work. Intelligence is also seeing the people in front of you for who they actually are, not who you wish they were. I spent a Yale law education being smarter than almost everyone in my class about the law and dumber than a fence post about my own mother. That's not stupidity. That's hope mistaken for wisdom. And I would tell her that strength is not the same thing as endurance. Anyone can endure. A doormat endures. A punching bag endures. Strength is the moment you decide what you are no longer willing to carry, and you set it down and you walk away, even though every voice you grew up with is screaming that you owe them one more mile. I am not the daughter my parents wanted. I have made peace with that. What I have instead is a life I built with my own 2 hands, a partner who looks me in the eye, a small dog named Biscuit who runs to the door when I come home, and the quiet daily knowledge that I am no longer auditioning for love. That, I have learned, is the only inheritance worth having, the one you give yourself.